Welcome to The Long Strange Trip. I'm Josh, the host of the show. We're going to dig into 6 areas together, finding real work-life integration instead of that brutal 95-5 split too many business owners live with. We're going to approach retirement as an actual reinvention rather than just stopping work. And we're facing death honestly and avoiding PTSD around it. We're also building resilience when life throws us curveballs. We're sharing wisdom across generations. And finally, we're understanding the patterns that show up in all our transitions. I'm not coming at this as an expert. I'm a fellow traveler, figuring this stuff out in real time, especially now as I navigate my own dual cancer diagnosis at 73. Welcome to The Long Strange Trip. I'm glad you're here. Hey, how are you today? This is Josh Patrick, and you're at The Long Strange Trip podcast. And today is a really special day for me because today I get to talk with my son, Sam Patrick. Sam has spent, 21, 22 years in the military, maybe 23, something like that. And he recently retired. He also is very active in what's called the Honor Foundation, where he is now helping people transition from special operations into civilian life, which is a difficult thing. So today we're going to talk with Sam about his transition and the work he's doing with the Honor Foundation. So let's bring Sam on. Hey, Sam, how are you today?
I'm good, Dad. How are you?
I'm well. So Sam, tell me, let's start with your transition out of the military. How long ago did you actually retire?
So July of 2024 was when I actually retired, but I also kind of had a mid-shift transition. Also, towards the end of my career in 2020, I left active duty and went to the National Guard full-time, which was a relatively major professional change of pace.
So let's talk about that for a while. What made that transition? Was it an easy transition? Was it a difficult transition? Or
The first one wasn't too bad because you're going from one organization to another one that's quite similar. There are subtle nuances. It's kind of, I would say it's like going from Coca-Cola to Pepsi. You're familiar with the industries, similar common operating picture. The end state is still very similar, but the subtle internal operating nuances are probably slightly different. And then, of course, the difference in mindset and personnel. The actual transition from out of military service was quite different and full of challenges that you don't quite appreciate as you're going through it.
what kind of challenges did you have?
Oh, I was actually thinking about this before we picked up the call. On one thing I think a lot of people in the military take for granted is how much is provided for you and you don't have to think about. For instance, healthcare, housing, clothing, blah, blah, blah. The schedule is very fixed and predictable, even though you may have to go away for periods of time. But once you realize that there's very few other professions or industries like that, it can be a little challenging when you step out off that threshold.
So what kind of challenges specifically did you have?
The biggest one, I think, is kind of the loss of purpose and loss of identity. It's just, no offense to anybody in the service. Once you get out, no one cares. It's not as brash as that, but people don't, like, you're done. Everything that's in the rearview mirror is behind you. And while there are certain skills and experiences you can leverage for your transition to the next journey, at the end of the day, that's you can't rest on those laurels, and this train of thought is evaporating rapidly. But it's really just kind of like the loss of collective purpose and community, I think, is the hardest part.
And but by the way, that's pretty much true, I think, with everybody that does a transition out of one career to someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is business owners who sell their business have a sense of loss because nobody's calling them. Executives retire from a company where they've been there for at least 5 years, maybe 10 or 20 years. Same thing as all the people that they were related to at work fall off the wayside.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have in the military, I'm assuming it's pretty much the same thing. Most people you talk to on a regular basis, they kind of disappear.
Yeah, no, it's very similar. So I think that's And that's another thing too, is the military transition is not spectacularly unique. There are people who have, like, for a careerist, if you do 20 plus years in any profession, and then all of a sudden it's on to the next great adventure. Yeah, it's a tremendous sense. I can't define it for everybody, but there are lots of variables and different highs and lows that people go through.
Yeah, that would make sense. Did you have any highs and lows that you went through?
Uh, my transition period was complicated by multiple things on personal and professional fronts, which, well, the professional fronts not so much, but yeah. I think for me, after getting out, it's been trying to figure out and honestly focus energy on things that are fulfilling. I have multiple different avenues or lines of effort, as we like to call them, on things I'm working on, and trying to find what fills the bucket, as the kids say, is one of the hard things to do. I think one of the big ones we all deal with is that sense of imposter syndrome when you get, like, whether you're transitioning from a high stress corporate position and going to something else that you're not familiar with. There's the whole fake it till you make it kind of mentality. And I think a lot of things, or a lot of people, will self-select out of opportunities without ever even trying to set foot through the door. I think that's one of the things I've struggled with, is figuring out really what I want to do and how much time am I willing to give.
Yeah, that's not an unusual thing. Are you doing a bit of experimenting with your trying this and trying that and see which fits?
Yeah, I definitely, through a lot of the things I'm doing that are the passion projects, are volunteer. So you're not tied monetarily, you're not tied with deliverables and expectations. It's more of you get the opportunity to experience the internal vibe of the job or the gig or whatever you want to call it, and then make determinations if you want to pursue it going from that. And that's one thing I highly encourage people. It's whether it's an internship or a fellowship or just volunteering and getting inside of an organization and being able to assess its culture before you fully commit to something.
So for retiring service people, it would seem that it would be a little bit easier for them because they have a retirement to fall back on. They don't immediately have to go out and make money, or
Yeah.
some do, but
Yeah, for your careerists, those who do the 20 years, you do get your military pension, and also you're usually going to draw some sort of VA disability, which provides a very comfortable safety net. So you basically, when we're mentoring people, you say, hey, what do you want out of life, when it comes to financial support? And that's your benchmark. And then you open your aperture to professions, jobs, or the gigs that will meet those ends, and then you know what you need. I think one of the pitfalls a lot of guys get into is you see a lot of people getting out of the military and going into contracting, for instance, and the old golden handcuffs get placed on them, and they start living to the means that they're making as opposed to what they needed when they were getting out, kind of stuck in the cycle where they have to keep doing a certain thing or make a certain amount of money because they've gotten used to living to that standard, which is sometimes entrapping.
oh, that would make sense. So your work with the Honor Foundation, how did you get started with that?
So for a little background on the Honor Foundation, it's a special operations specific transition program. So the military does spend $13 billion a year on transition programs that are run by the government, which they try but hit the mark. So the Honor Foundation essentially steps in and fills some of the gaps for the special operations community, where we put them through a 3-month program. And what's really unique is we make the individual look at themselves. So I went through the program, I volunteered for a little bit, and now I'm actually working for them as one of the campus coordinators up here in Washington.
So what did you learn when you went through it yourself?
I mentor our new fellows to not be like me and take it for granted and think you have a plan. Because that was my biggest pitfall, was I thought I had transition figured out before I did it. Being in the National Guard, your network is like, my network was very strong. I had a lot of people I could fall back on, but I did not lean in on to the personal journey of discovery as much as I could have. because we put them through the Gallup Strengths Assessment, the career leader, not a professional assessment to kind of help focus their aperture. But really, we look at their Gallup strengths and kind of, hey, how can you use these as superpowers and leverage them to go out and meet what you would like to do in your next chapter of life?
So, what was the challenges that you had going through the Honor Foundation?
It was more of a taking it for granted and thinking you figure it out. I think that
Yeah.
one of my common threads when people ask me what I do now, if I find a common thread between the multiple projects, it's all revolves around lessons learned from the mistakes I've made or the mistakes I've seen others make. And on the medical side, there's clinical mistakes, but on with the Honor Foundation, it's mainly not realizing that what you're about to embark on from a major transition is a lot harder than you think it is. And I think accepting and being vulnerable and acknowledging that it's hard.
And how many of the people going through the Honor Foundation program actually do that?
Pretty much everybody in cohort, because one of the things I do very early and often, I'm not the director, I'm just the admin guy, for lack of a better term. I really try to set the conditions early and just give them kind of like the cold hard truth. Like, hey, this is hard. Like, don't be like me and take it for granted. Like, really take the time and put the effort in at the very least in the first 4 to 5 weeks where you're doing the heavy work and heavy look at yourself and give it the time that deserves. I've quickly, or not quickly, like part of my transition process out of the military was the acknowledgement that my ADHD or ADD, whatever you want to call it these days, was terribly dysregulated and not compensated. And I was masking my entire military service because you're given, like if you're ADD in the military, you actually excel because you're able to rapidly shift fire from the thousands of things pulling your attention, which when you get out of that environment, you're like, why can't I do X, Y, or Z or focus, etc. And I think that's one of the things I try to tell people is like, take the time, take the genuine time as opposed to doing what we did so much in the military and just click through whatever you're trying to do to get to the end.
So, one of the things that I read about a fair amount is retiring military folks that fall through the cracks. Is there a lot of that in special operations, do you think?
I would say it's probably less, but honestly, though, I would say that in the special operations community, the guys mask incredibly well. They compensate incredibly well. So I don't think it's as many as who are, because the resiliency that you build going through certain programs. But I think when people break, they break catastrophically. I think I don't have the data to back it up, but I would assume that the catastrophic moral injury events that occur in special operations service members who get out are probably a little bit more spectacular than some others.
Is that because of the pressure they were under for the period they were time in special ops?
It's a multitude of things. I believe that part of one of my other passion projects I'm working on is trying to get longitudinal data on that very question to kind of like figure out how we can do better building the front end resilience. I think we're veterans as a whole, what I see is if everybody who says, hey, veterans need to be treated better, like, no, they're treated pretty well. They just have to put in a little bit of work to get the resources that are the massive amount of resources that are available to them. And unfortunately, when you're in the military, a lot of things are pretty easy. Like it might take more time than it needs, but it's pretty easy to get access to stuff. When you get out, the onus and work is on you. It's not on your squad leader. It's not on your commander. It's not on your first sergeant. You have to go out and do.
So when you start working with people in the Honor Foundation, are they still active duty or have they?
Yes.
They are.
Yep. So for the most part, yes.
And how much time before retirement is there?
So my personal recommendation is since there's 76,000 benevolent veterans organizations in the U.S., so obviously it's a very crowded space. For where a lot of transition programs focus is job placement, the Honor Foundation is different because it's holistic and you focus on the individual. We give you all the tools you need to go land a job, but we're not going to place you in a job. So I tell people, if you can, if you're a retiring careerist at 20 plus years, if you can at 18 months before you separate, come through, that will allow you the very smooth glide path, like taking off on a 777 going to faraway place, as opposed to like trying to do a fighter ramp and straight up into the air. Um, for the guys who are not at 20 years and you can't commit 18 months before you get out, like at least 6 months before they do. So that sweet spot's 18 to 12 months because it allows you to really kind of sit and stew in what you just went through and come up with a better plan. And honestly, a lot of guys we have come through re-enlist who are not end of career guys.
So well, that would actually make a lot of sense because they look at what they're on the outside, and it's easier to stay in the military, I would assume.
Yes, well, the job market right now is not super awesome.
Well, the job market's always a job market. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. So that's really, I mean, are the other placement programs in the Army, or did they start that far in advance, or they wait till you're pretty much retired?
They do. So you have a lot of, it's called there's a skill bridge program. There's other various internship programs where you can get actually placed with companies, or like for skill bridge, for instance, like I had a friend who went back to his brother's farm in New York and farmed for 6 months. So it's how you spin it and sell it. And that's gotten restricted a little bit more, but by design, the programs, the military-based program, the transition assistance program is not bad. It just, when you're doing it so much, so often, people lose kind of the zest. And then also too, when you're dealing with people who don't really care a lot, that's a problem. But no, I think honestly, there's more than enough assistance. It's honestly trying to get it narrowed down for what you have time for is the hardest part.
And when you have, how many organizations did you say there were? 60,000?
No, the RAND study that I read when I was trying to do some back study into the benevolent veteran space, like, so there's 76,000. Again, this was, I think, I don't remember when they pulled their data. Veteran service organizations is what they call them. That can be as simple as a small nonprofit that has 3 people that it's servicing. So like, it's a huge number. I think it's probably in the thousands, like the 4 digits numbers and mid 3 to 4s that are actually kind of the heavy hitters nationwide. But it's still an incredibly saturated space. And that's one other problem about the nonprofit space is we're all competing for the same kind of donor pool.
And how do service people decide? I mean, how did you end up deciding to go with Honor Foundation versus something else?
So THF, I ran into one of my old pilots in the commissary, and he convinced me. It's honestly, it's word of mouth and rapport. So like, I think that's one of the things in special ops, for instance, we're notoriously distrustful of those who aren't us. So for us up here, like our campus, like we've hardly had to do any recruiting to fill it up. So it's all word of mouth. And if you put a quality product out and the grassroots initiatives and the word of mouth initiatives work, that's how we're filling seats. We usually have a wait list where we don't have enough room for people to service. So that's a good thing. For the other ones, it comes down to, again, a lot of the word of mouth, but they do these transition fairs, they do career fairs, and essentially you're being recruited into these programs. So there's a recruiting and sales aspect associated with it as well.
That makes a little bit of sense. So it appears to me your program is a perfect match for our general transition process, which is, the ending is coming, so you're in anticipation. And you get these folks really early in the anticipation stage about leaving the military. So it gives you a really long runway to help these people get ready for the ending, which is retirement. And once you hit retirement, you go into what we call passage, which is this really messy middle where everything, nothing seems right side up, everything seems upside down. And you don't know if the left hand or what the right hand is doing. And I'm assuming that happens with pretty much everyone, including folks in the military.
Yes. I think that's that passage phase. And like, I went through that, and it's rocky. It's kind of like going through a hurricane, and our goal is to get them to go through. Like, we don't want it to be completely storm free, because that, like, you have to feel a little discomfort. But like, instead of a Category 5 storm, I'd rather have them go through a gale.
Yeah, well, everybody, in my experience, everybody who has a major transition basically goes through 4 steps. And the 4 steps are anticipation, ending, passage, which I like the messy middle for that term better, because I think it's more accurate. And then finally you get to a new normal, where all of a sudden it's almost like a butterfly who's coming out of its shell, and you spread your wings, and now you're all of a sudden you notice, hey, things aren't so bad here anymore.
I think that's the big one.
Yeah, and that's, for some people that might take, a few weeks. For most people, I would assume it takes 6 months to a year. And for some people, it might take many years. It's the same thing with, in my own particular case, when I retired, or even though I was not admitting I was retired, even though I was retired, that went on for about 3 years before I finally said, oh, okay, here's something I can latch onto, which is what we're doing now.
Right.
And that was, was a hard time, and, for me, it wasn't just retirement. It was also health issues that they kind of got in the way also. But that's, for folks who are my age, that's not an unusual thing.
Right.
For people your age, I would assume it's unusual. So if you were talking to a service guy who was not in special ops, what would be the 3 or 4 or 5 things you would say you really need to focus on before you leave?
I would say figure out who you are, first and foremost.
What do you mean by figure out who you are?
Because when you're in the military, it's a collective we, it's team. The individual is never celebrated. You're not rewarded for individual effort very often. Sort of, but like, at the end of the day, it's looking at what gets you out of bed in the morning, who you are, what's important to you, and what your values are. Because in the military, you're given the military's values, choose all of them or whatever. But I think that's one of the things that, by design, if you look at basic training, it's designed to break the individual down completely and rebuild the team mentality. So you have to reverse program yourself that it's okay to be selfish. It's okay to look out for you. It's okay to take advantage of the resources that are available to you from your service. That's another thing I've seen a lot of guys do, is they'll self-select out of resources and benefits because they don't feel like they earn, which is absurd. But yeah, so take advantage of the benefits, take advantage of the resources. The VA is full of people that want to help. I think what's daunting is it's hard to navigate. So persistence pays off when you're looking at external support. That, as I mentioned, there's tons of veteran service organizations that want to help. Every major company usually has a veterans employee resource group that is super helpful. And quite frankly, if you're on LinkedIn or you're job searching or you're trying to get kind of company culture and research, that people want to help people getting out of the military. Because also, one thing that we forget about in military service, we take showing up on time in the right place, in the right uniform, for granted. But apparently that's a very hard thing in much of the civilian sector these days.
I would say that was true, because you have to show up, whether showing up at the right time as a civilian. So I have one more question for you, Sam. Why is it so many military folks, and it may not be so many military folks, why do military people fall through the cracks when they retire? Is it because they're not 20-year people and they're 10-year people, or?
I guess what do you mean by fall through the cracks?
Well, I a lot of the times when I'm reading about homeless folks, the military, veterans pop up all the time. And the one thing I don't know about is, are these 20-year military people or 5-year or 10-year military people?
So that's another hard part, because the data's not complete. It's kind of like if we look at gun violence in the country, we have a very narrow data set to focus on that doesn't go into the layers. So I'd be curious, like, how many of those veterans are separated under less than honorable conditions? How many had discipline issues while they were in? How many had medical conditions that they were prescribed medications and then became dependent on those medications, and that was the reason why they got discharged, because they started using illegal substances. And I think that's another thing too, is unfortunately the culture of news reporting these days is a little sensationalizing. So like, I don't personally feel like the numbers of people slipping through the cracks is that big. And without being able to go out there and actually ask and conduct a truly unbiased survey, like I just don't think we have enough data to really delve into the why. I think there's many contributing factors, but I don't think there's one singular why we could point out.
Yeah, I think the big macro question I would be asking is, are these people who are ending up homeless, are they 20-year vets? Are they 10-year vets? Are they 5-year vets? Because it appears to me the 20-year vets have a lot of services. It is hard for a 20-year vet to fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
I'm going to bet a 10-year vet has almost no services as compared to what you folks have.
It depends on your VA rating. I would honestly venture to guess that most of the people that are kind of your stereotypical homeless vet are single termers.
Yeah.
Because if you can make it 10 years in the military, that shows commitment and drive.
Okay. That makes sense.
That would be I don't think it comes down to services, honestly. I think it comes down to mindset and mentality and resilience. And obviously there are outliers for everything, but what I would venture to guess is most of these guys who did one tour, didn't like it, they got out, and then just kind of got stuck. And that's another thing too, is people can get comfortable in what we define as discomfort.
Yes.
And a lot of things too, like you look at the homeless kind of mentality, like there's just a lot of nonconformists. Like, I don't want to follow society's rules, so I'm going to do my own thing. And that's how sometimes they do it. And of course, substances and mental health are huge, but it's a complex problem and no simple solution. And at the end of the day, the people who function fine, they probably have a little bit more resilience and or follow through or commitment than somebody who does.
So Sam, unfortunately, we're out of time. And we could go on for quite a bit longer, but I don't want to have people trying to sit around here for an hour because we get boring after that.
Yeah, that's right.
So if somebody wanted to contact you who's retiring, would you be willing to talk to them?
Yeah, absolutely. So my email address for the Honor Foundation is sam.patrick@honor.org. You can also go to www.honor.org, which is the homepage. We do have programs for everybody in the military, not just those getting out of special operations. So there's a program called Vector Accelerator, which is a self-paced, I think it's 4 or 5 modules where you kind of get the surface level stuff, but really it's designed to help you focus on yourself and narrow your trajectory on where you want to go.
That sounds like a wonderful service also. And I have something I would ask you. If you've enjoyed listening or watching this podcast episode and you said to yourself, gee, I have a good story that Josh should hear, why don't you contact me and see if you would make a good guest on this show? It's pretty easy to do. All you got to do is go to jpatrick at stage2solution.com. That's the number 2 and solution is singular, which is jpatrick at stage2solution.com, and see if the Long Strange Trip podcast might be something good for you. So this is Josh Patrick with my favorite male friend, Sam Patrick. And you're at the Long Strange Trip podcast. And I hope to see you back here really soon. Thanks for spending this time with me today. I really appreciate you being part of this journey. I'd be grateful if you'd leave an honest rating and review. It helps other people find these conversations, lets me know what's landing with you and what isn't. If you love the show, give us 5 stars. And if you hate it, give it 1 star and I'll just cry a little bit. Keep asking the hard questions. Keep being honest about what's difficult. And remember, we're all just trying to figure this out together. I'll talk to you next time on the Long Strange Trip. Thanks for stopping by.